Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining again today. We will be going over the Tribes Training for Parents and Caregivers, Module B. Today's overall theme is understanding stress in relation to our bodies and minds. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. So today we're going to open in a positive way. It's going to look a little bit different, but for the most part, we want to just be able to welcome you all back. And we're going to do a prompt here to just get ourselves going and thinking and reflecting. Want to thank our hosts for today for this great opportunity to come together. So I want to draw your attention to page B3 in your workbooks. There's going to be a prompt there for you all. And we're going to just take a moment to think about what is one thing about being a parent that either brings you joy or makes you the proudest? So let's take a moment to think about that. And there's some space in your workbook where you can jot down any thoughts or ideas, and then we'll share out. So can I get a few volunteers, maybe one or two people, to share their responses to what is one thing about being a parent that either brings you joy or makes you the proudest? All right, so I'm going to call on Deidre first.
Hi. One thing that makes me really proud as a parent is just watching my kids and how their personalities are very different from each other. Just watching them become people, I think is really cool.
That's awesome. Thank you, Deidre, for sharing. Ryan.
Hi. I think one thing that brings me joy and makes me the proudest as a parent is seeing my kids succeed and reach their goals in school.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you all for taking some time to reflect on that. We're going to move on to the next slide, which is going to review our learning agreement and parking lot. So as you saw before in Module A, we want to just check in and make sure if these learning agreements are still okay with everybody. Is that okay? Does anybody want anything to add? Okay, great. I see some head nods, thumbs up. Awesome. And we do have a parking lot. So we didn't have any parking lot items that we added last time, but just a reminder that that's still there. Those are for any thoughts or topics or ideas that we weren't able to get to in the module, but we want to have a space to hold them. So at any time, we can add that to the parking lot for Module B. And we also want to remind everybody about the exit ticket that's going to be handed out at the end of this module. If you have any questions about the exit ticket or how to fill it out, please let Teresa and I know. And we'll be completing that at the end of our session. So as I mentioned, in this module B, our learning goals and objectives, we're going to have an overview, and I'm going to read that out loud. Module B overview is the goal of this module is to help parents understand how stress and trauma affect the brain and how thoughts and feelings affect parenting. And the learning objectives are identify how stress and trauma affect the brain, body, and development, identify the relationship between historical trauma and ACEs, and also identify how historical trauma has interrupted traditional parenting practices. Does anybody have any questions about the goals or objectives for this module? Okay, great. And as a reminder, if you would like to look at the learning objectives, they are on page B2, and you can use your workbooks to follow along with this training and all subsequent sessions as well. And now I'm going to hand it over to my co-facilitator, Teresa, to take us through the next set of slides.
Thank you for your participation. We were really excited to see you all back today for Module B. I'm going to go over a little bit of review from Module A and take you into a little bit more about responses to trauma. So you can turn to page B3 in your workbook. And in Module A, if you recall, we talked about historical trauma. We learned a little bit about impositions, burdens, and challenges that inflicted trauma across our American Indian and Alaska Native population. Confronting the trauma is the healing path that Dr. Yellow Horse Braveheart and Dr. Chase described in the video we watched. We also learned a little bit about common responses to trauma. So as a review, does anyone remember some of the common responses to trauma we discussed in the last session? Deidre.
Sometimes when people like stop going to ceremony or maybe community events.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Anyone else? Ryan.
Yeah, I think I remember we talked about emotions, like feeling sad or angry a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that and for the quick review on what we discussed last session. And as a reminder, again, trauma experiences can cause enormous stress physically, mentally, socially, emotionally, and spiritually. So in this module, we'll go a little deeper into understanding trauma. As a reminder, please lean into self-care as needed. So we'll begin by exploring adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, one of the frameworks for understanding trauma responses. Adverse essentially meaning difficult or even harmful childhood experiences can include traumatic childhood events such as abuse or neglect. It can also include witnessing experiences like domestic violence or crime, being exposed to parent or family conflicts, including divorce, and experiencing or being exposed to a family member experiencing mental illness or substance misuse. These experiences and exposures can result in long-term negative effects on learning, behavior, and health. We refer to these experiences and exposures that may occur to children during their childhood as adverse childhood experiences. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into ACEs. And so on the next slide, you'll see adverse childhood experiences and a number of circles there, which we refer to sometimes as domains. This image on the slide and at the bottom of your workbook, page B4, you'll see the same graphic. It's adapted from the Association of American Indian Physicians and tells us that when ACEs happen, it can create dangerous levels of stress on the body that can impact our physical, mental, social, and spiritual health. This impact can get in the way of healthy brain development and increase the risk of smoking, alcoholism, depression, heart disease, and dozens of other illnesses and unhealthy behaviors throughout life. So it is important to highlight terminology such as the term ACEs so we can be advocates for our children. Childhood experiences, both positive and negative, can have a tremendous impact on lifelong health and on opportunity. It's important to remember that our children grow up and go on to have children of their own. Those changes in physical health, mental health, and social health, and even changes in brain development can get passed on to their children. Science calls this epigenetics. For our tribal communities, these are not unfamiliar concepts. Consider how it might have looked like Traditionally, when a woman is pregnant, we know that environments, thoughts, energy, and spirits can have an impact on the baby. Western science is catching up to what we already knew. Nationally, research demonstrates that ACEs are significantly higher in Indigenous communities due to some of the concepts that we've already discussed, such as historical trauma and continued systems of oppression. It is important to point out that the same science behind ACEs also points to solutions built up upon the cultural foundations and strong resilience within other communities. So let's talk a little bit more about what that means. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Rebecca to take us through the next few slides. Rebecca?
Thank you, Teresa. In this next slide, we're going to play a video for you all. This video clip is called Biology of Toxic Stress. It's about 2 minutes and 32 seconds. And I'm going to ask you all to turn to page B5 in your workbook. Before we watch this video, let's think back to our previous session where we discussed common responses to stress. And before we begin, I want to just kind of highlight the responses you all gave a little bit earlier. Ryan, you had mentioned about some emotional common responses to stress. Deidre, you had shared not attending community events. Can we come up with one more example? Deidre.
Is that like when your body goes into like fight, flight, or freeze?
Right, exactly. The fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses are ways our body reacts to stress and danger. So that's a really great example. Thank you. So we'll be expanding upon these concepts, watching the video. And I'm going to ask you all to take some notes while you're viewing the information. And they use the term toxic stress to refer to experiences of both stressors and trauma. So you're going to hear that term throughout the video. And so while you're watching the video, there's some space at the top of B5 in your workbooks where you can write some notes or ideas and thoughts down. And I'm going to ask you all to pay attention and note any examples of toxic stress and how these examples might change child development, caregiving, or parenting. So you're gonna kind of look out for when they mention that in the video and jot those down. Okay, so we're gonna play the video now.
The reality is that we all need a certain amount of stress, a certain amount of anxiety to perform well. If we don't care about that exam that we're gonna have tomorrow, we'll probably fail. If we're gonna cross the street and a truck is coming at us, we have release of adrenaline. We have release of a hormone that we call cortisol. We want to jump out of there, and adrenaline and cortisol are going to help us do that. So there's that good amount of stress. But if all day long you're feeling like a truck is coming at you, day after day after day, that's going to take a toll on the body. And the amygdala obviously here has greater activation.
Yes.
In the PTSD. We were able to image children that had experienced trauma and compare those brain images with children that didn't have an experience of trauma and didn't have symptoms.
Right, an exaggerated fear response.
An exaggerated fear response with decreased activation in areas that we need to control that emotion in the frontal areas.
Exposure to early adversity and trauma literally affects the structure and function of children's developing brains. So the kid next to them hits them, or the teacher reprimands them in a way that they're uncomfortable with, right? Literally what they're feeling, that activation is like there was a truck coming at them. You can give something that will mask symptoms, right? For example, if someone has a cough, right, you can give them a really strong cough serum that will suppress their cough. But if it's because they have tuberculosis or lung cancer, then what you're doing is merely masking the symptoms while the disease process continues to fester. We know what's happening in children's brains and bodies with the experience of toxic stress. So the question now is, what do we do about it?
Thank you all for watching the video. We're going to go now to the bottom of page B5, and we're going to have a brief discussion and answer some of those debrief questions there. So the first one, what are some examples of toxic stress that were mentioned in the video? And are there any others that you can think of? Can I get a volunteer to share what they wrote down? Suzanne.
Yeah, I noticed it was really interesting to me how that young person in the classroom, that cartoon image of hearing a loud noise or something, taking that child back to an accident, or back to a trauma and feeling like they were back inside of that trauma, even though they were in a safe classroom, and how it can feel like that trauma is still happening. And so for me, I was just thinking about not necessarily others, but it was really interesting to me to hear that a young person might seem like they're safe and I might not notice anything else is going on, but that young person, if they've had a trauma, they can relive it even though they're not in danger.
Great. That's a really great reflection. Thank you for sharing, Suzanne. Let's go to the next question. How might toxic stress or trauma change our child's development, or ways that someone parents their child even? Can I get a volunteer to answer that question? Great, Ryan.
One of the things that I saw in the video was that trauma impacts the way children's brains develop, and in turn, it changes the way that people parent their kids. In my experience, I noticed that as a parent, I pay a little bit extra attention to the way my kids react to the things that happen throughout their day.
Thank you so much. That's an excellent example and a great self-reflection too. Thank you so much for sharing that. We really hope that this video highlights stress or trauma, and like you said, Ryan, can really impact child development and parenting. And I think what you're getting at too is just observing how those impacts and helping to create safety can also help us to recover from some experiences that we've had. In instances of trauma, whether it's physical, sexual, emotional abuse, physical or emotional neglect, or even being subjected to physical violence, or even affected by substance use, addiction, or dependence. These are just some examples of those types of traumas, but our primary goal will be to recognize those trauma impacts and to, like I said, create safety, seek treatment services, or even traditional interventions when appropriate, and also to provide support, right? To address this, we will discuss resources and our circle of support in another upcoming module. So we're going to talk more about that in a future session. But for now, we understand that histories of toxic stress or trauma can really significantly impact the way we think and how we interpret our experiences, and also in turn, what influences the way we respond in everyday situations. So the example you gave, Ryan, was really great. Much like what the child in the video experienced, that accumulation of stress and toxic stress can make everyday experiences like being called upon in a classroom feel unsafe, which you had mentioned, Suzanne. And our brains make our bodies go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. So to counter this, we recognize some helpful resources or thoughts that can be the first step toward resiliency. And we'll talk about resiliency as well throughout future sessions. So additionally, in Module E, we'll also discuss more about development and childhood milestones. So we'll go through those topics as well. So thank you all for participating in that discussion. We're going to go to the next slide and actually take a little break. So we'll have a break for about 15 minutes and we'll provide you the time when to return. So please remember to take care of yourselves, and any self practices, please feel free to do so during the break. Thank you all.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break. I could see people mingling around, having some snacks. So I, again, hope you had a good break and we're ready to dive right back in. So now we are going to work on a tool that can help us to disrupt some of the thoughts from turning into behaviors, feelings, and emotions, and subsequently impacting our body. And feel free to follow along page B6 of your workbooks. This is called the hand model, and it was developed by Dr. Dan Siegel. With this model, I'll be using my hands, but you can also use your hands as we go through this activity. So in demonstrating this activity, so your wrist becomes, and the bottom of your hand represents the brainstem and is responsible for things like breathing, heart pumping, blinking, functions that we really don't need to think about. The thumb represents the amygdala, which is responsible for sensing danger and helping us to respond. Your fingers represent the cerebral or prefrontal cortex, which helps us to make thoughtful decisions and manage emotions. But when we sense danger, the amygdala or the thumb sounds the alarm. And this is when our lid becomes flipped and we react. This means our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response for danger or threat is engaged. Some examples of fight, flight, freeze, fawn can be found in your workbook on page 8, B8. This part of the brain also stores old memories of past danger, and sometimes that means we sense danger even if it's not there, we react as though it is. So let me ask you, what makes you flip your lid? Yes, Suzanne.
I've been in a really bad car accident before, and whether or not I'm in danger or not, when there's cars that like ride me too close and start like weaving in and out, I know for myself, some of those things that were listed in our workbook on B8, like feeling queasy and cold hands and rapid heart rate, I have to like get off the road when that happens. Like I can feel myself back in that car accident, even though I'm not there.
Thank you for that, Suzanne. And just something to think about. Do you think it's possible to stop ourselves from flipping our lid? Deidre, I see you shaking your head no. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the tools that we can use, such as going outside, counting to 4, maybe breathing, that we can talk about that could possibly help stop ourselves from flipping our lid. Research says it only takes 10 seconds to stop your lid from flipping or to flip it closed again before you react emotionally. There are actually many tools. Some we've practiced. I gave you a few examples. The breathing, using breathing techniques, going outside, those kinds of things that we could actually use to keep our brain from flipping and before we react emotionally. I want to take us into an activity. It's a coloring activity. So please turn to page B7 in your workbook, and I'll walk you through the coloring activity. And you'll see that the image in your workbook is the same image that's on the screen. And we see our thinking brain, our feeling brain, and we have staircases coming in and going out. The upstairs part of our brain is known as the thinking brain, and the downstairs part of our brain is known as the feeling brain. When we are calm or in thinking brain, our thinking brain helps us to solve problems and make decisions. When our lid is flipped, we are in the downstairs brain or in our feeling brain. This is when we are sensing danger and are in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. You can also find, again, a list of common symptoms of a flipped lid on page B8 of your workbook. Each of you has coloring items on your tables, and I'd like for you to take 5 minutes and color following the directions on the worksheet. Color the upstairs a calm color and decorate with coping skills. For example, the drumming activity or other positive coping strategies that help you. And then color the downstairs with a loud color and decorate with feelings, like the feelings you get when you perceive danger or a threat. So take a few minutes and we'll come back and we'll debrief this activity. All right, everyone, let's come back together. I was walking around the room and I really noticed some very colorful drawings. And so I'm really excited to debrief this activity and get a little bit more into some tools. So how do you know that you're in your calm brain? What were some of the things that you wrote down? Deidre.
When I'm in my calm brain, some of the things that I wrote down is like I know what I'm cooking for dinner, and I just feel really productive in the day. Like I feel like I know what tasks need to get done and I can get them done without like worrying or feeling stressed. But the big thing that I noticed was I know what I'm cooking, whereas I think when I'm feeling really stressed, I just want to get takeout for the kids and I.
Thank you, Deidre. And then I'll also ask, so how do you know you're about to flip your lid? What are some of the warning signs? Ryan.
For myself, I wrote that I know I'm about to flip my lid because I can feel my stomach hurting a little bit more, and I can feel my muscles tensing up. And then I think in my mind, I feel my thoughts start to race, and I feel like I'm expecting the worst a lot of times throughout the day.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Ryan. Appreciate the response. So sometimes people say they can feel anger, such as their chest tightening, face getting hot, and as Ryan mentioned, his a stomach ache and things like that. So again, feel free to take notes on B7 of the things that we've covered so far. Are there any questions at this time? Deidre.
Yeah. Is it okay if we don't know what to do and our lid gets flipped? Because sometimes I feel like my emotions are just so big and they're all coming at me so fast that before I know it, before I can even know it, my lid is already flipped. I'm already there.
Thank you for that question. And absolutely, we've gone over some tools today, but we also know that it might be necessary to reach out to professional help, or other traditional supports that you might need in order to get back into calm brain and calm thinking. I'm going to go ahead and tag Rebecca back in to get us through the rest of Module B. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Teresa. And I just want to mention also that we're going to also go more in depth in Module D and discuss some additional resources. We're actually going to cover what's called a circle of support, and we're going to do a little activity. And we're also going to start building a toolbox of strategies for us as parents and caregivers. So we're going to look at those things more in depth in a future session. But I want to draw your attention to the next slide, and we're going to be talking about some impacts of thoughts and beliefs and how they can actually impact our parenting and caregiving. So I want you to think about here are just some tools for building that toolbox. And that this is really important to know because the way we behave or cope is actually influenced by our thoughts. And so I want you all to turn to page B9 in your workbooks and follow along here and write down any notes if you like. When a situation arises, we have thoughts about the facts of that situation, and sometimes those thoughts can trigger feelings. And based on those feelings, we engage in behaviors which in turn impact the situation either positive or negatively. And so I want to just take us through this next activity, and you can look at the slide here for reference. This the way that our thoughts and beliefs impact how we behave is not a new concept for Native peoples. Consider how this might have looked traditionally. For example, when a woman is pregnant, we know that environments, thoughts, energy, or even spirits can have an impact on the baby. That's just one example. I'm going to read to you another scenario. I want you to think about this, and I'm going to ask a few questions after. Okay, so the scenario is a youth is walking down the hallway at school when they notice a group of students glancing at them, talking and laughing. Worried that they are being made fun of, the youth can feel their skin start to flush and their brains start to spiral. They start to feel tears in their eyes, and so they run away. In this example that I just gave, the activator or situation was students talking and laughing. Can I get a volunteer to answer the question, what do you think the belief or thought was of the student? Ryan.
I think the belief was that the young person thought that the other students were laughing at them.
Right, exactly. And if I can get another volunteer to answer, what do you think was the consequence of that? Suzanne.
Yeah, they became tearful and they ran away.
Right, right. There was a little bit of emotional distress. Maybe even the student might thought about skipping class or school, right? There was the feeling of their skin starting to flush. So those are all like reactions to that situation. What if the youth's first thought had been, maybe they look like they're having fun or having a good time. Maybe somebody must have told a joke. What do you all think would have happened next? Deidre.
Maybe the youth would have joined and been part of the laughter too, or maybe they just would have gone to class.
Right, their behavior or maybe their choices and what they would have done could have changed, right? Just based on the kind of thought that they had. That's great response. So you can see from this really brief example how thoughts or beliefs can impact our feelings, emotions, our behaviors, as well as what happens to our body. This activity also really emphasizes the point that I think, so I feel and do. All right, so now let's try 2 more scenarios related to parenting. And we're going to do this as a large group. So I want you all to turn to page B10 in your workbooks. And again, there's some space there to write down notes. And we're going to go over a scenario. And then we're going to come back together and just kind of share some responses. So now turn to page B10 in your workbooks. And there's some space there that you can write down some notes. And so I'm going to read the first scenario here. Okay. You bring your family to a community gathering and you see a cousin you haven't seen in a while. You wave, and although you're sure they've seen you, they turn and walk away. If your first thought is, I always knew that cousin thought I was a bad parent, what might be the next thought? Ryan.
I think my next thought would be that they wouldn't want to be seen talking to me at a huge community event.
Right. Yeah, that might be the first thing that enters your mind, right? As a reaction. And if those are similar things that come up, if those are your thoughts or our thoughts, what might be the associated feelings or emotions, or maybe some of the behaviors that impact our body? What do you think would happen? Deidre.
I might, if I felt like that or if that happened, I might like feel ashamed and like want to hide.
Right. Those are some of the things we might be feeling in that situation. Great example. So what do you think could have been some positive thoughts that would have had a different impact? Can you think of any examples? Suzanne.
Kind of like our last scenario, if I just was neutral, like, oh, they must have not seen me. I'll have to check in later if I see them and just not worry about it. I think that then I'd be able to Deidre's point, then I wouldn't feel the shame and embarrassment. It's kind of neutral, like, oh, they must have not seen me. I would have been able to let it go.
Great. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing. All right, so I'm going to go into the second scenario here, and we've been doing a group activity. So we're going to go into small group activity for this next one. And I'm going to ask you all to turn to page B11 in your workbook. And there's going to be a space to write down notes. And before we do that, I would like for you all to just identify a person to report out after we complete this activity, all right? So I'm going to read the second scenario out loud. And here we go. It has been 3 weeks since school started, and you get a message from your child's teacher. The message is that you all need to set up a meeting right away. And your first thought is, my child has done something wrong, and I need to get to the bottom of this. So in your small groups, you're going to have about 8 minutes to complete this activity. And you're gonna go through here on the slide. What are some thoughts, emotional feelings, behaviors, or impacts to the body that you think would arise from this scenario? Kind of like how we talked in the first scenario, you're gonna come up with some examples in your small groups, and then we're gonna report out, okay? So let's take some time to do that. Okay, let's come back together again. Can I have somebody from one of or a few of the groups just to share one example that you came up with from the scenario? Ryan.
Yeah, so our group, and what we talked about was, um, after our initial thought being worried that our kid did something bad, that we felt scared that our kid did something bad, and maybe in the meeting or going to talk to the teachers that it would reflect on us. Maybe like we're bad parents, or maybe we taught, our kid to do something wrong. So we would go in feeling, like worried or having to be defensive because, of whatever the situation might be.
Right. Yeah, that feeling of thinking we're gonna be judged, right? That's definitely a real feeling that can come up. Thank you. Anyone else? Deidre.
Yeah, our group talked about like initially being really angry. But some were saying like angry at their child for doing something that would prompt the phone call or email. And then some of my group members were talking about how they're automatically like angry at the teacher because then if they're calling, then they must think like, and we have to have a meeting, kind of what Ryan was saying too, or that group, that we were going to be judged. And so we were ready to be like and show up in mama bear status at the school, like, ready to throw claws with people if we needed to for our kids.
Right. We sometimes react in a way that surprises us, or sometimes that's just, how we're feeling in the moment. Yeah, that's great examples. Thank you all for your responses. Thank you for reporting out those examples. Now I'm going to ask you to go back into your small groups for just a few more minutes. And I want you all to try and come up with an alternative thought that you could have had from the teacher's message. What is a either positive or neutral response that could be an example? All right, let's come back together, everyone. Can I get some examples from the groups of what an alternative thought could be? Suzanne.
Our group went in the opposite direction and we talked about all the wonderful things that the meeting could be about. So we were like, our kiddos on honor roll, or they won an award for best student of the year already 3 weeks into the school year. But we really were like, what could be something that's really amazing as our thought?
Great, thank you. Great example. Who would like to go next? Ryan.
Yeah, so our group kind of took a more neutral route and wanting to practice some of our calm mind skills to prevent our lids from flipping right away. And so we talked about maybe going into the meeting with the teacher kind of with the calm mind, just ready to have whatever conversation the teacher wanted to have. So, just again, keeping our lid from flipping before we had even gotten to that point of having that conversation.
Awesome. Thank you for that example. Deidre.
We just talked about wanting more information, like just respond to the email and say, what would the meeting be about and how long?
Yeah, another great example. Awesome. Thank you all for participating in that. And we just want to highlight that it's important that we emphasize recognizing how our thoughts influence our behaviors. And you all gave some really great examples to think about. So that concludes the activities for Module B. And we're going to go to the next slide here. And you'll recognize this from Module A. And we're just gonna go over some reflections of the day. And if you would like to follow along the page on B12 in your workbook, you can jot down some notes here as well. I just want to thank you all for your participation throughout this training, and that there are some final activities and reviewing homework at the end of this module. So in this session and future sessions, it can bring up emotions or can feel heavy to discuss for some. And so we just remind you all to please take care of yourself. And if there are any resources that we can share with you all, Teresa and I are here to do that. And also any self-care practices, feel free to let us know if you have any questions about those after this session. So on B12, we would like for you all to take a moment to ask yourselves the following. If I need support, who's a person I can reach out and talk to? Is there an activity I can do for self-care? And is there a resource I can use if I need support or help? So I'm going to give you all just a moment to write any thoughts down in that area. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide here and close out our day. We just want to highlight a little bit about Module B. We talked about flipping our lid and having a calm mind or a calm brain. We went over some strategies and scenarios. And so thank you all for your participation. We also want to highlight here for the homework on page B12, the question here is, one way I will practice noticing helpful or unhelpful thoughts this week. We ask you to take some time the rest of the day to write down some ideas. And we're also going to hand out some resources, local resources related to this topic today. And myself and Teresa, we're also going to distribute the exit tickets. So we ask that you will fill those out, and if we could collect them from everyone before you leave. And just as a reminder, there's places to indicate your reaction to the class using the emoji. You can also let us know something new that you learned or want to learn more about, or if you have any questions regarding the session today. And the last question on that card is if there's any follow-up that Teresa and I need to do, please indicate that on the back. So thank you all so much. We hope to see you all again for Module C. And again, Teresa and I will be here at the end of the session, and we'll be hanging out for a while if you have any questions. But thank you all and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.